Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about the respiratory system. We will go through the notes of the respiratory system and you guys will work to add them into your note packet. So on this assignment, you should see this packet, which is attached to the assignment. And you will also see the video that I'm making currently. The other thing you want to make sure that you're doing is, remember, we want to always make sure that we're updating our checklist that I posted. I believe I posted it April 6th. It's the distance learning checklist. So I'm going to open up Living Environment 1. Hopefully you saved that someplace safe. This is going to be activity number 9. And then it is the respiratory system notes. And it is in a Google Doc. Okay. So make sure you add that there and you keep moving along this list and checking off the things that you need to be doing. But here goes. Here. It's making me start in the middle. Let's go back to the beginning. So, the human respiratory system. Obviously, the human respiratory system has a major function of being the place where the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the atmosphere and the blood inside your body occurs. It's important because it brings in oxygen needed for cellular respiration, which, remember, cellular respiration is the process of making energy, or ATP. It removes carbon dioxide, which is produced by cellular respiration, again, and that is considered a toxin for the body. Parts of the respiratory system, the air pathway, if you think of it that way, it starts in the nose. Technically, it's the nose is part of your respiratory system, not the mouth, but obviously we do take in some air through our mouth as well. The nose, then the back of your throat, you have the pharynx and the larynx. The pharynx, the pharynx is like your adenoids, sort of, and then the larynx is your voice box. Then it moves down into the trachea, which is the tube that runs into your lungs. Remember, you have a tube that goes into your stomach as well. That is your esophagus. These two tubes are pretty much right next to each other, which is why you sometimes accidentally choke on water. You're supposed to be swallowing the water down your esophagus. Sometimes you accidentally bring the water down your trachea, and that's when you kind of snarf it up. The epiglottis is right here. The job of the epiglottis is to keep the water and food and things from going into the trachea. Obviously, sometimes the epiglottis malfunctions, but typically that is the point. The epiglottis is like a flap. It sort of covers the trachea tube so that when you're swallowing food or drinks, that stuff goes down the esophagus tube, not down the trachea tube. Beyond the trachea, there is what we call the bronchus, or the bronchi. More than one bronchus is a bronchi, so here's a bronchus, here's a bronchus. Together they are a bronchi. And in there, they branch off, the bronchi branch off into what we call bronchioles, okay? At the very end of those bronchioles are like, hopefully I have a picture in here, but they're called alveoli. That's where the blood vessels are. That's where the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide happens. It happens through diffusion between the lungs and the bloodstream, which you should have already seen in the ED puzzle on the circulatory system. That little circulatory red blood cell does a really good job of kind of showing how it goes and bumps along the blood vessels in the lungs so that you see the oxygen jumping onto it and the carbon dioxide jumping off of it. Oh, one more thing. This down here is your diaphragm. Diaphragm's not on this list of the airway pathway because the diaphragm isn't part of the airway pathway. But my fun fact about the diaphragm is that when you get the hiccups, the diaphragm is basically like is basically like a flat muscle that sits right underneath the lungs, and it kind of seals off this cavity up here. And the diaphragm sometimes gets folded up. So if you can imagine folding up a pancake, sort of, or if you were to have, this is my mouse pad, and so the mouse pad maybe sits right underneath the the lungs and it's just this flat muscle. Well, sometimes the diaphragm gets sort of curled up like this, okay? And that is what makes you get the hiccups. The body getting the hiccups is your body's way of trying to sort of jolt this flat muscle back to being flat. Once you get it flattened back out again and not curled up, then your hiccups usually stop. So that's the fun fact about your diaphragm. So, in the nose, you have your hair. There's hair in your nose. I know you don't want to hear that, but it's true. There's hair in your nose. It filters out the dust and other big particles that might go up your nose accidentally. Then there's cilia, which, will trap microscopic particles and sweep them towards the throat. Mucus is the it warms and moistens the air, and it helps to trap the microscopic particles. And then you have the epiglottis, which we already talked about, which is the flap that prevents the food and the fluid from going down into the lungs. The flap covers the trachea. So, your lungs are sort of set up, or your bronchioles and your alveoli are sort of set up like, I call them like sticks with like berries on the end of them. So if you see this picture up here where they're pulled out the alveolus, it looks like, well, like grapes or something, right? Like berries kind of hanging off this branch of blood vessels. So the trachea is like the tree trunk. And then the bronchus here and here are like your really big branches. The bronchioles that spread out along here inside each of the lungs, which you can't really see because they don't show you it in this picture, those are like your smaller branches. And at the ends of all those small branches, there are blood vessels. And they're in the sac called the alveolus. And that's kind of why they look like they're like rounded little grapes or something like that. And you can see that the oxygen will diffuse into the bloodstream from the alveolus. This is a little bit of this square picture right here. They've blown it up. And the carbon dioxide that's in this bloodstream, which is this darker red right here, this carbon dioxide will diffuse back into the alveolus and allow the lungs to exhale it out. Okay, so oxygen diffuses from the lungs into the blood. At the same time, the carbon dioxide is diffusing from the blood into the lungs. So it's almost like they're going through a toll booth. If you've ever gone through one of those big toll booths, you're going one way and there are other cars going another way, but it's all happening at the same time. So they're passing through this barrier here through diffusion, but it's all happening at the same time. So maybe you're getting on the throughway through the toll booth and the other cars are getting off the throughway through the toll booth. Either way, it's all happening at the same time. And this is what gas exchange in the lungs is. Breathing is obviously movement of air into and out of your lungs. When you inhale, you bring air into the lungs. This is where your diaphragm contracts. That's that pancake muscle underneath your lungs. The diaphragm contracts, the chest cavity expands, and the air is moved into the lungs. So basically the diaphragm like pulls down towards your stomach, almost like you were stretching a balloon. When you exhale, the exhale forces the air out of the lungs. The diaphragm relaxes, causing the chest cavity to shrink, and the air is pushed out of the lungs. Your brain determines the rate of breathing by measuring the amount of CO2 in the blood. So a lot of times you guys think that you breathe heavier when you're exercising because you need more oxygen. And while that is true, you need more oxygen because you are making more energy and using up more oxygen. The fact that you're breathing heavier and your breathing rate is actually determined by your brain's ability to measure how much CO2 is in your blood, not the oxygen level in your blood. It still makes sense though, because the more you use up the oxygen while you're making ATP, the more you put out CO2, which again will trigger your brain to breathe heavier. Remember that in cellular respiration, we talk about the ingredients and the cupcake and the dirty dishes. So the ingredients for cellular respiration are that you need oxygen and you need glucose, which we get from food. And then the products are one of them is the cupcake and one of them is the dirty dish. The products of cellular respiration is ATP, which is the cupcake. That's the reason the organism does the reaction, because they need energy. And then the waste product, or the dirty dishes, is your CO2. Okay, so don't forget about that part. The most dangerous thing, one of the most dangerous things in the world, is tobacco. It has all of these gross things in it here. Obviously, it has nicotine in it as well, which is a stimulant drug. It is the addictive drug. It has CO, not CO2, CO, the carbon monoxide, which blocks the transport of oxygen by the blood, so it makes it so you can't transport oxygen as well. And tar has been shown to have cancer-causing agents in it. Of course, if you're looking at the rest of all these gross things, ammonia is toilet bowl cleaner, radon, radioactive gas, acetone is a rat poison. It's also nail polish remover. Um, you know, things like hexamine, barbecue lighter, gas, carbon monoxide, gas from the car, sewer gas, methane, ugh, all that stuff, super gross. Don't put it into your bodies. So, diseases caused by smoking. So here's a sample of lungs on the left. You can see these are lungs of a person. Obviously, the person is no longer alive. However, this is the lungs of a person who was not a smoker. And on the right, you have the lungs of a person who was a smoker. You tell me, which ones do you prefer? You could have chronic bronchitis. This is where the bronchi become swollen and clogged with mucus. So instead of your bronchi being nice and open and having airflow freely into those and out of those tubes, your bronchi will be a little bit swollen, so you can see the edges are thicker, and there'll be some mucus inside, which basically makes it more challenging for you to inhale air and exhale air, and of course, ultimately harder for you to take in oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. Emphysema is basically your lungs are considered like balloons. They stretch when you inhale and they unstretch when you exhale. Here's another picture here of the berries, the alveoli at the bottom of the lung, of each little lung branch there. So over time, your lungs lose the elasticity, so they lose the stretchiness in your lungs. Now, this happens to everyone as they age, but someone with emphysema, it's a little bit more extreme for them. So as we get older, our lungs are less stretchy. Everything starts to kind of wear out when you get to a certain age. But the emphysema is where that happens quite a bit more, and it's more severe, and it's a little bit more challenging to someone's health. So it basically just slows you down from being able to take in enough oxygen or remove enough carbon dioxide. Lung cancer. Cancer is basically like the uncontrolled cell division, where cells are developing in an area of the body that don't match the other cells. So basically that's where a tumor comes from. It's like a clump of cells that don't match the other cells. So this is obviously your healthy lung on the left here, and this is your lung cancer lung on the right. Smoking can also cause heart disease. Even though smoking is attached to your lungs and not your heart, obviously, hopefully you're figuring out that the respiratory system and the circulatory system work very, very closely with each other. Smoking can narrow the blood vessels, which makes you have higher blood pressure. And it also makes it so your blood and your heart have to work harder to get your blood all the way out to your fingers and toes. So this picture here is showing you a heat signature of a hand. So obviously the more blood there is, the brighter it will be, which to me says this person is not circulating blood very well, because either that or they are missing parts of their fingers, but I don't think they are. I think that the blood is not circulating very well, partly because the heart has to work so hard to get the blood everywhere it needs to go when the blood pressure rises and the blood vessels narrow. This person could potentially lose those fingers that I believe are still there in that dark shadow. But I bet their fingers are always cold too, because the less blood you have, the more cold your extremities will be. Passive smoking is also known as secondhand smoking. It's inhaling the smoke of others. It can be very damaging to children's lungs that are still developing. I think I've told this story before, but back when I was a kid, my dad was a smoker. He smoked right in the house, and I honestly never really thought anything of it, never realized how strange that was until when my parents split up. I lived mostly with my mom, and when I was younger, before my parents were split, I used to get bronchitis and or pneumonia every single winter. Without fail, I got one or the other or both. Once my parents split up and I lived mostly with my mom, who was a non-smoker, I didn't get it nearly as much. I still get bronchitis or pneumonia here or there, but it's not nearly as consistent as it always used to be. I used to get one or both every single winter without fail, and now I get it every couple of years or so. I haven't had pneumonia in years. I get bronchitis every couple of years or so. One of my sinus infections turns into bronchitis. But still, much, much better than it used to be when I was little and I was living with a smoker. Okay, so that is the end of this section of notes. You're just going to fill in that note packet as you go. Feel free to pause the video or go back and play whatever else you need to go back and play. If you need help with anything else, please let me know. And I look forward to hearing from you. Bye.